All right.
Hello, and thank
So
you.
hi.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
It's
Oh,
okay. It's okay. Hi, thank you for joining us tonight on another episode of Breaking Reality. I am your host, Joshua McGuire, and tonight with us we have Lurie Kimmerle, and we are going to be discussing the divine feminine, the empowered woman. And let's just go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's just get into the show.
sure. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I was confused when I started off because you said you can start talking in 5 seconds. So I was like, great. So I guess I'll just start talking. And it makes complete sense that there would be an introduction as well. I don't know why I wasn't thinking of that.
It's
But
okay. It happens, one of my guests when we went to start the show, he as soon as I said, "Okay, we're going live," he picked up his glasses like, "I got my glass of water here," and I'm like, we're live, man." He's like telling me about his drink and stuff.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah. Well, my name's Lurie.
Hi, Lurie.
My name's Lurie Kimmerle, and I am a spiritual coach working specifically with feminist spirituality. And my interest is how do we draw back the voices of women from the past forward to create liberating spiritual paradigms for women. So my primary program is called the High Priestess Path, which I talked about a little bit last time when I think it was just workshopping. And now it is about to be a full or a beta program, which is, a tester program, because I want to run this big program called the High Priestess Path. So we're starting off with a small group of very brave women who are joining me on this adventure of creating something new.
And kudos to those women.
Yeah, it's really cool. They're trusting me. I'm like, we're going to talk about all this stuff for 10 weeks. Join me. And they're like, okay. Which is really thrilling. So it's turned into that. And that's our primary program. And it's all about how for 2,000 years, Western culture has predominantly been marinating in patriarchal religion.
Yes.
And all that while, there were women. And there were ways that women were honoring and understanding and following God that were not accepted into the institution. And for some periods of history, they were considered that crazy grandma in the village.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, they were considered the witch you don't talk about.
Right.
Other times, they were the heretic you burn. But either way, that wisdom and that knowledge was not included in our written tradition. And so how do we reach back and pull that knowledge forward? And that's what I do with women and helping them figure out how not to necessarily have to fully abandon. Many of the women I work with aren't, they still like Christmas. They're
Right.
still kind of into Mary, but they're not down with some of the BS that they're reading in the Bible, or they're not down with the patriarchal bullshit.
Right.
And so how do we still not abandon our grandmothers and their wisdom that they carried with them? Well, that's kind of where I'm at.
And I really think that's important that, you're working with women on this aspect of empowering that divine feminine aspect is what you're doing. You're empowering that knowledge, that wisdom, that connection to the divine, that connection to the source, and that sacredness that's there. And like you said, we've been under this patriarchal rule for so long, for 2,000 plus years now. And look where it's gotten us. I don't think we're any better off than what we was before the patriarchal rule set up. And if we touched on this the last time, if you look back before, the Catholic Church came in and set up their rule, and because really that is where you started seeing a lot of the patriarchy come in, and during the time of Constantine and his rulership and stuff, that's really where you saw this strong patriarchal power start to come in. But before that, it was a matriarchal society in most of the world. There were some areas where it wasn't, but even in your tribal cultures where you might have a man as a chief over a tribe, they always went to the women in the tribe, usually the older women who were considered, the wise woman or the healers, and they went to them for counsel.
Right. Well, I want to warn about one thing is that patriarchy was around in the Greco-Roman culture well before Christianity existed, as well as in Eastern Europe. And there's a lot of evidence about it in Egypt, in Israel, and Mesopotamia.
Yeah,
So it's probably a bit older than just 2,000 years. It didn't come just with Constantine, but it definitely,
it seemed
the
to take
way that
it seemed to take more of a wider scope at that point in time and start to
it's
really dig roots in where there was patriarchal rule in different areas, like you mentioned. It really seemed like that's kind of what kicked us into what we have today too.
I definitely think what we have today. But I also want to honor the women who were oppressed under some Greco Roman rules where they could not own property, where they had to keep their head covered. They couldn't leave their homes. They couldn't have any say in who their marital partner was. And there was just a lot of really deep devaluing of women. But one interesting thing is women still had spiritual power in those spaces.
Right.
So women were, to still be killed by your husband if he didn't like you anymore. But there was also a sense of women being priestesses. So
Right.
there wasn't a question if women were sacred or that birth was sacred or that menstruation was sacred or sexuality was sacred. Um it was a question of women being considered equal or equally valuable to men. But their holiness wasn't questioned. Mary Beard has a really interesting book called Women in Power, and she's a classicist expert in Oxford, and she talks about the complicated relationship of the Greco-Roman world and patriarchy, and how there are ways that in which women were equal that we're so deeply yearning for today, and women were valued in ways that we're deeply yearning for today, but not valued in ways that we really don't want to. Women were elevated after they died, but when they were alive, they weren't respected. And so that was a big trend that happened a lot. But the feminine in and of itself as a spiritual entity has been really complicated in for humanity
Mm-hmm.
for a really long time, because I believe that we want to know, is it valuable? And we want to know how it contributes. And the more and more that society developed, when we started believing we could own the land, that's when we started to believe that a man owns the land then, and then he needs a wife so that he can have sons to give the land down to. He needs to have workers for the land. And suddenly we have this male leadership over all the land, the animals, the women, the children, the servants, and sometimes even the slaves. And that is where this concept of hierarchy, and I think the interesting thing is that patriarchy is tied into capitalism, it's tied into racism, it's tied into classism, and it all works together to participate in the destruction of the earth and the destruction of our family units and the destruction of society and all these things. So I really believe patriarchy began when we thought we could own the land, when we started saying, this is my patch of land and this is
Right.
not your patch of land, and
And
forgot that the land was our mother.
right. And it was a matter of that patriarchal idea of dominating and controlling the land too. Of, I'm going to shape this into whatever I want it. And that also went into the way that they looked at their relationships with women, that they wanted to
Mm-hmm.
shape a woman into their idea. You have to obey what I say. You have to do what I want. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about looking at a woman and respecting her for who she was, to see the sacredness in her and say, be who you are, embrace who that is. And I really think, even today in society, we have that today so much, where you look and you see, especially in you know in the United States, within our society, the way marketing and advertisements and stuff are done, they try to tell a woman, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to be a certain way. And then, in a lot of mainstream religions, it's the same way. Honestly, the little clip that I sent you just the other day that said, if a woman was meant to submit, it would be natural, and we wouldn't have to have, thousands of sermons a day all over the world preach about that, a woman's role is to submit. I don't believe that. I think that a woman's role is to stand alongside a man, and a man's role is to stand alongside the woman, that they should be equals, that they should be on equal footing, that they should stand side by side, not, one walking two steps behind the other, like, you've seen and some of the more controlling aspects and stuff where, the woman wasn't allowed to walk side by side with her man at one point in time.
Right. And that's where I say I think that's been going on for 10,000 years, much longer. And I think what ended up happening with Constantine is that the patriarchy that existed in the Greco-Roman era translated into the religion, the dominant religion. So Constantine comes in charge. And actually there was a lot of problems because pre-Constantine, women were very much the leaders in the early church.
Mm-hmm.
Women were setting up the churches, they were running the houses, the house churches, and they were the prominent income. They were the donors because women were either former prostitutes who were wealthy and had land, and then they decided to convert and take on an ascetic lifestyle, which was completely different than how we understand it today. They weren't having sex, but it was still asceticism in the early church was very different than asceticism today. And it was very pleasurable, actually. So they gave up their homes and they would donate it to the local churches and the local leaders. And a big problem that the popes during the time of Constantine had was that, and the bishops, was that women were not going quietly.
Right.
And there was a lot of issues around women not wanting to give up their power. And that is kind of how we got convents today, is women getting to stay together and follow the abbess, eventually what became the abbess, the leader of that community. And that's I think that's a fascinating thing, that I think we think of Christian women as this. Christianity has women as silent and submissive, and it does so often, but that's not how it was in the beginning, when it was small and illegal and not powerful. It
Right.
was much more egalitarian.
Right. And I grew up in a very conservative Christian home, and it was one of those things. My father was the leader of the house. My mother stayed at home, took care of the kids, and there was times where they would talk about decisions that they needed to make on a larger level. But honestly, at the end of the day, whatever dad said went.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course.
And
yes.
And it's one of those things that now, even I'm 44 now, so growing up, so the time from when I was small until now, the changes that I've started to see is, there's still a lot of that there, but I'm seeing more and more women come into their power. More and more women realize that this idea of being this silent, submissive wife really isn't what they're called to do or where they're meant to be. But then at the same time, they're kind of lost on how to really step into that power because they haven't had anyone showing them. They haven't had the examples there. It's like all they had was that submissive wife that fell into that role that she was told that she was supposed to play. But then as some of these ladies today are stepping up, they're really struggling, looking for that way to embrace that power and to step into it and to know how to truly own it.
Right. And I think one thing that happens a lot in our conversations around gender inequality is that we talk about, and really this is true for almost every oppressive system, is we talk about how can the oppressor, so in patriarchy, what can men do? Or what can white people do? Or what can rich people do? Or what can colonizing cultures do? And I think that that's an important conversation for us to be having. But I think the other question that I ask is, as a woman, is what can women do? And I think that there's an interesting concept of a triangle. And some of you might have heard about this in bullying classes. Sometimes it comes up in trauma bonding conversations when people are co-bonding through abusive relationships and things like that, where it's a triangle where you have the villain, the victim, and the hero in this triangle. And oftentimes what we do when we talk about patriarchy specifically is we put men in the role of the villain. We put men in the role of the villain and women in the role of the victim. And then when we talk about how to change the narrative, what we end up doing is moving men into the role of the hero and women still in the role of the victim. So she becomes the dragon in this fairy tale. If you switch it to the dragon hurting the queen, the princess, he becomes the knight in shining armor who's going to save her from patriarchy.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that for the men who are listening, yes, there are so many ways to learn and grow and shift your perspectives and figure out where your privilege lies and how to use your privilege to help people. At the same time, it's not that women need a hero. That's actually been one of the things that they've been complaining about, is that they don't necessarily need a hero. It's that they need to be able to step into the role as the hero themselves. And one of the things that I do with my clients is teaching them how to not only just step into the role of being their own hero, but also owning their role as their villain as well, which is a really interesting trichotomy. And that's one of the ways you get out of those trauma bonding as well, is realize that you are your victim, you are your villain, and you are your hero, instead of putting the other person in one of those roles in the trichotomy. And so we talk about how to do that. And I would love to talk a little bit more about the High Priestess Path and the 8 gates as well, and what we go through.
Absolutely.
And kind of my philosophy about women stepping into their power. Because when I began my spiritual journey of breaking away from patriarchal theology, which is my word for any theology that fully relies only on the voices of men. So a patriarchal theology is probably most theological texts, most historical books. It is a lot of it.
Right.
But any idea that is received dictated only through men. And this idea is that we need to break away from patriarchal theology and create new liberating paradigms for women and their spirituality. And for me in that journey, I narrowed it down as I looked back to 8 different gates that I walked through in order to be able to stand in my power as the high priestess of my life, of my spirituality, of the woman I am, and to be able to not need a hero, and then be able to start having a shared interdependent relationship with the men in my life instead of dependent.
Right.
Or independent, as if it's just like, get away from me, I don't want you in my life, where they're playing the role of the villain in my life. And it's hard, I think, for some women to hear the idea that you're the villain in your own narrative, because it feels like victim blaming, but it's not. It's actually a ladder to help you climb out of the role. So the first level, the first gate, is desire. I believe that patriarchy has disconnected us from desire. In marketing, they talk about there are 3 main desires that all humans have that you can use to get people to buy your shit. And it is, people want money, people want love, and people want time. If whatever you're selling gives you money, love, or time, or gives you easier access to money, love, or time, people are interested in it. And when I heard that in a marketing class, I thought to myself, wait a minute. All 3 of those things are what women have been taught to give over to men. We've been taught to give our time over. And women talk all the time about free emotional labor, free intellectual labor, free time labor, and this sense of having to give extra care and extra attention to men who are not able to do the work on their own. Women have been love is, I think, for so many women, especially straight women, is something that has been used over and over again in a way that has been so dangerous for women, where we feel like love is, it's just such a mess. I feel like every woman listening to this, the moment I say love, they're like, yeah, got it, check. You don't need to explain it.
This is for the men out there, so you guys know.
And money, I think, is so interesting, because whether a woman is leaning on a man for her income or she's working, she's typically there's so many women who end up being single moms and working double time because the father is not around, or there are so many women who are working double time because their partner isn't investing their time. But then if you do have a partner who's investing his time and making money and meeting you equally, there's also even then still this pressure that, am I making too much money? Am I not making enough money? And then also leaning on a guy if you choose to not work and let him take care of you. Then there's also patriarchy that seeps into that. Money is a whole complicated thing for women. And if you're a woman listening to this, read the book We Should All Be Millionaires. It's written by this incredible woman named Rachel Rogers. And it's all about how patriarchy has created our current relationship with money. So there's these 3 areas that supposedly we all operate our desires on that women have given over to men. And how are we then supposed to even know what we want when from the very beginning we've been conditioned to consider our wants through the lens of how it's going to benefit the masculine in our lives? How are we even supposed to know? Down to what we eat has been dictated to us around men. What we wear has been dictated to us around men. Even like I remember growing up and being taught that the way you decorate your house is about creating a happy place for your husband and for your children, not for you.
Now, see,
And
that is one thing that was different in my household growing up.
oh, okay.
Mom controlled how the house was decorated, and it was one of those things. I remember going out and like we would be out at a store or something. Mom's like, "I really like that painting. I want to get that painting." Dad'd be like, "Okay,
Okay.
we're buying that one, and that one's going up in the house."
And it might vary depending on family, but
Right.
even there's so much about caring for a home and setting up a home that is targeted towards women in a maternal, mothering, wifely duty. Men are not encouraged to buy home and garden magazines, and they're encouraged to maybe go to Home Depot
Right.
and like mow the lawn, but not creating and nesting and creating a home. And so, and any impulse is often associated with weakness or being girly or being silly and it being frivolous. Like, oh, she just wants to buy another painting. She's constantly wasting money on curtains and paintings and constantly wants to redecorate and constantly always having to clean the house. And this sense of it being silly and frivolous, but yet also the feminine zone. So our desires and our wants are either silly and unnecessary, or they're selfish, or they have to exist unless they exist for a man. So desire is a big one. How do we connect more deeply to our desire? And I think each gate leads into the next one. So once we know our desires, then we talk about body and our relationship with our bodies. And I posted about this on my Instagram recently about how you are ashamed, women, we are ashamed of our pussies, and I'm using that word specifically, intentionally, because patriarchy does not want us to be proud of where it wants us to experience shame. If we are ashamed of our bodies, and when I say pussy, I mean the sacred divine feminine. I mean it anatomically. I mean the vulva. I mean the womb. I mean the ovaries. I mean the whole thing. And I mean the nervous endings that are connecting that into your brain. I mean the divine energy that is interconnected with that. I mean the goddess. I mean your image as the divine feminine. I mean all of it. And if you don't have a vulva or a uterus, I'm still talking about you. I'm still talking about your sacred, holy femininity. And they want us to be ashamed of it because then they can control it.
Right.
And so if we feel that we are too big, too small, don't look the right way, don't dress the right way, with the way we move, if we monitor the way we move our bodies, then we can be more easily controlled. So reclaiming your body, something that is so deeply been stolen from so many women, either through abuse or simply by broken teachings around modesty and purity culture, our bodies have been stolen from us, and we need to reclaim them.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to desire and when it comes to body, if you're saying, well, how am I a villain in that? It's our participation in it.
Right.
It's our choice to say, okay, I can't dress that way.
Right.
Or, okay, I can't actually want that. That would make me selfish. That's how we join in.
Or, it's like I was just actually talking with a lady the other night. She said, she had the whole ordeal going on just recently where she kind of was looking at different things in her life, and one of the things that she had been so entrapped by that modesty culture of she has to cover herself up and she can't be proud of her body and she has to look a certain way. And she said, I finally just got over that. She said, and I just looked at myself in the mirror, and she's like, I am a beautiful, gorgeous woman. And she said, and I started loving my body for what it was. She said, and she's like, I've got love handles. She said, I grabbed a hold of my love handles and said, I love these. They're part of me. I absolutely adore them. They're great. They're cute. I love them. And she started, she was talking to me about how she felt empowered then. And I told her, I said, that's exactly what you need to be doing. That's how you need to be looking at yourself. Don't allow anyone to ever look at you and tell you that you have to fit into some mold that they try to fit you in. And I told her, I said, if any of your partners ever try to tell you that, tell them to fuck off.
Yeah. I mean, and I think and I love how she says, well, one day I just decided I love myself. And I would wager, though, if she was sitting here, she would also tell a story of years of learning to love herself. Because the conditioning, I talk about how we're marinating in this BS for 2,000 plus years. It's going to take more than a book or a podcast or a Facebook group or anything like that to really just snap out of it one day. We've got to learn to marinate in something new and something liberating. And that's one of the reasons why I don't just write a blog or sell a book or do anything like that, because I find that when I'm working with women weekly, bi-weekly, and we're marinating in something for the High Priestess Path is going to be 70 days. When we're marinating in it for 70 days, if it takes 28 days to form a habit, oh, sisters, we're going to kick this in the ass in 70 days. Really marinating in something new, a different way of understanding ourselves. But then once we understand our bodies, we have our relationship with the masculine and feminine that needs to be figured out. Because we either we have wounds with both. We have mother wounds, we have father wounds. We have ways that the masculine has harmed us, and we have the ways that the feminine has harmed us. And how do we fix our relationship with the feminine so that we can stand in our femininity and see it as sacred and not silly or frivolous? And then how can we also stand in our masculine? Because we all have masculinity and femininity inside of us. Right. How can your masculine become a protective tool, something that honors your desires, something that you use to have your desires and your dreams? And so then when you meet a partner that is, be it a man or a woman, they're able to meet you at your masculine and feminine self in a way that they're not filling a hole in you.
Right.
They're complementing you fully, right?
Right. And it's about bringing those into the proper balance and stuff. And when they're wounded, usually when there's a wound with the feminine or the masculine, one side dominates over the other and there's an imbalance. And it's when there's that imbalance that it's not healthy, and that's what causes a lot of conflict and stuff as well. And so it's a matter of really bringing that into the balance. And I do want to say that applies to men as well. Men, you need to be
100%.
embracing your feminine energies as well, as
100%.
and not just being like, well, I've got to be a man and this is how it's got to be a man. And that's one of the things that we hear a lot about toxic masculinity.
Yes.
But you hear toxic masculinity, but you don't hear any solutions to it. It's just toxic masculinity is an issue. Well,
no, we don't hear solutions for it. And I think that's one of the other reason why I was so inspired to start teaching classes, because as I go online and I hear feminist conversations happening on the internet, I'm not hearing solutions. I'm hearing, and if we are talking about solutions, we're talking about, oh, well, we just need to pass a law for equal pay for equal work, which I'm totally supportive of.
Absolutely.
Definitely down for. But I don't think that's going to heal the wounds. I think that's going to be the Band-Aid. The healing of the wounds is what happens when we do the inner work. And I think when that becomes imbalanced, women have toxic masculinity then inside of them, where their masculine self is suppressing their feminine self, and they're abusing their feminine self. They're calling themselves silly. They're calling their desires silly. They're insulting their bodies. And then men also have toxic femininity in them sometimes, where they're not able to really honor their masculine selves. And I see this a lot with men who see themselves as allies. They actually actively then do the reverse to themselves, and they suppress their masculine side so that they can feel like they're not bad, because they demonize their masculinity instead of detoxifying their masculinity.
Right.
Which is really what we need to do.
And that's a thing that you see it's one of those things that at times when if you hear the word feminine or
Mhm.
feminism, a lot of
Mhm.
people automatically think, oh, that person's anti-man. They're a
Right.
man hater. They hate men. But really, at the core of it, if you really look at it, it's not. There's not a hate there. Truly, if you look at someone that is from a feminist point of view, like you are, you come from a very balanced, a very healed point of view to where you realize that masculine energy has to be there, that masculinity needs to be there, but there also needs to be that feminine energy there as well, and
Right.
they have to coexist in a balance, not just within a couple or a partnership, but within ourselves as well.
Exactly, exactly. And so that's why I have 1 week dedicated to the feminine and 1 week dedicated to the masculine. Because I also found when I became single, when I got a divorced, I had was so hyper feminine and so much my computer might die. Hold on.
Okay.
I fear all of your viewers are just going to think I'm the lady that never charges shit, but that's okay.
It's okay.
Well, I'm plugged in, so now it's good. Um I had so much fear because I was so hyper feminine, and the feminine is designed, again, we all have masculinity and femininity in us, but the feminine is about receiving and the masculine is about giving. So the feminine receives her desires and the masculine creates space for the feminine to receive her desires as well. And the masculine goes out and gets what he wants, and the feminine um receives what she wants, I guess, is the best way I can explain it. And I didn't know how to do that because even in my healing of my feminine self, I needed a man to do those other things, to have healed masculinity and take care of those needs. And I had never experienced healed masculinity. But when I healed my masculinity, man alive, did my bar for men in my life go really high up.
I was gonna
Because it
say
was
it
like,
changes the way that you look and what you're looking for.
oh, absolutely. Because it's not that I don't need a man because I'm so independent. It was, I don't need a man because I am my best husband that I could ever have in my life.
Right.
I am the best provider I could ever have in my life. I am that. So the only person who gets to partner with me gets to be someone who is going to be fully and completely meeting me in my masculine and my feminine.
Right. They're
They have
meeting
to be
you on that
fully
equal
balanced.
equal footing,
Exactly.
equal level. And well, it's even in the Bible it talks about, don't be with someone who you're unequally yoked with.
It does, which is interesting. My biblical scholar nerd is just about to like adjust my glasses. But yes, I don't think Paul is thinking about divine masculine and feminine when he wrote that. But yes, I think that there is a sense. But I was thinking when you were saying that, I even think about the Bible when Mary Eve is first created. Uh, Adam says to her, "This is the bones of my bones and the flesh of my flesh." This is my absolute equal.
Hmm.
And what we've done, and I just did a live in my Facebook group, and if any women are listening and you're interested in joining it and watching it, it's called the Women in Spiritual Deconstruction and Reconstruction. It's a closed Facebook group for women. I just did a live and I talked about how this concept of the equality of men and women, so all the while the Catholic Church is not being good to women. The medieval period was not great to women. I'm not arguing that these were like feminist utopias, but the catechism from the very beginning in the Catholic Church saw husband and a wife as bone of their bones and flesh of their flesh. It wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that this idea of women having to submit to her husbands came to the forefront. And that was through the writings of Martin Luther, who said that men were closer to God because they had bigger heads and they were more logical, and women were closer to the earth because they had wider hips. That was his logic, the logic of the ages. But
And such flawed logic, especially looking at it today, in that people still stand on the teachings that came out of that logic.
oh, and people and that logic reaches all the way back to, I think, a misunderstanding of what Augustine was arguing for. I'm sorry, Thomas Aquinas was arguing for which I also think is very broken, and then also goes farther back to Aristotle. And also, if anyone's interested in Thomas Aquinas, my podcast called The Sex Positive Christian Feminists interviewed a Thomas Aquinas expert on gender in Thomas Aquinas, which is fascinating.
Do me a favor. I don't think I have the link to that podcast. Send that
Cool.
to me after the show, and I will put
Sure,
that up.
absolutely.
I will put that up in the show description so that we can make sure people can access that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send the specific link to Dr. Ford's interview because he did his dissertation on Thomas Aquinas and
And
queer,
I'm going to
queer
listen
theology.
to that too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and he made some nice arguments for Thomas Aquinas that made me like him a little bit more, but still problematic.
Right.
But there's this idea that started coming up more and more through the Protestant Reformation that really reinforced the division of the sexes. And as we go through that, you see capitalism getting so much stronger in Europe, colonization starting, enslavement started, the triangle trade, and we see the formations of the nuclear family starting to form, where the man is the king of the household instead of the peasants working together, which is not, again, a feminist utopia in serfdom under monarchies, but still there's this sense of interconnectedness that starts to dissipate. And as that dissipates, the elevation of the individual man starts to happen, and everything exists for him. But that creates a higher and higher level of toxicity in the masculine, where we don't really understand what masculinity is in its core divine self, because we've put it in a place that it's not capable of standing under.
Right.
And so, I mean, and how terrible. I think sometimes it's so terrible what we do to men in our culture, where we tell them you need to be the sole provider for a woman and a child. You're not a good provider if you're not providing all these things. You have failed as a man, and you need to be ready to fight anyone who comes into the house and beat them up, or else you're not a man. Instead of saying, like, you can't do it all on your own. You need
Right.
people.
Well, I want to go on that point even more so about some of the things that society says, about being a man. I grew up, and I've always been one of those really sensitive type people, and I wear my emotions on my sleeve. If I feel an emotion, I show it. I was called a sissy, I was called a wimp because I would cry if I got upset about something. I would show those emotions. I would show tears. And it's one of those things that I even saw some of that with the passing of my mother this past winter. My father was, when he would start to break down, while she was in the hospital during the final hours, he would say, I want all the guys out of the room. I want to be back here, but it was okay for my sisters or my nieces to be in there with him. But he didn't want any of the males seeing him cry. He didn't want to show that weakness in front of them. And to me, that's what he needed to be showing them. He needed to be showing that tenderness. He needed to be showing that soft side to them so they can understand what that is and what that means, and that they can do that as well. And that is an important part of being a man. Is being able to stand in those kind of feelings and those kind of emotions. And
it's an important part of being human.
Right. It exactly. But our society has told men, you don't do that. The only real emotions that you can show are either anger or happiness. Anything else, we're going to take those off of the board.
Right. And I think then, and because emotions are considered feminine, women can cry and women can express anger and we can express disappointment, but we're considered weak as well when we do it, because it reinforces that women are weak. So the emotion, so what ends up happening for so many women is that we also suppress our feminine, in order to survive, in order to be taken seriously. I even remember when I was in school, this very deep need and fear of wearing makeup, curling my hair, wearing something nice in a professional setting, because if I had to look professional, but not so feminine that I wouldn't be taken seriously. Because the wrong dress, the wrong shade of lipstick, the wrong earrings, suddenly I'm only here to get married. I'm not really here to study, or I'm not really serious as an academic. And it's such a silly attitude to take, because if more people were allowed to embrace their holy femininity on all of its levels, then we would have a more complete view of the divine as well in ourselves and in other people. So that inability to express our emotions ends up destroying our inner feminine and our masculine. And what happens is either our masculine gets overvalued and then the feminine gets destroyed. But then sometimes what ends up happening is that as women learn to love their feminine selves, they forget about their masculine self. And so you can't forget it. We have to detoxify the masculine.
Right. Well, and
So,
I mean, as you was talking about, like what you said about, you know, not wearing the makeup and not dressing, you know, in dresses, or, you know, what would be considered more girly type clothing and stuff in
yeah,
school.
not even in modest, just girly.
Right.
Yeah,
It's the same way in corporate America. If a woman does that, then
sure.
all of a sudden she's just using her sexuality to sleep her way to the top to get a promotion. And they take away any of the credibility of her skill, her ability, her intelligence, of her
Right.
actually what she truly brings to the table, what she, you know, her importance and her value.
Right.
And, you know, that kind of thinking in culture and society is so toxic and so bad to have out there, because, I mean, look at some of the advancements women have made in science and stuff, but
Yeah.
they don't get the knowledge and the recognition because, well,
They're women.
yeah,
But many of those women, even because it's like, well, if I show that I'm feminine, then I will get even less recognition than I'm currently getting. I'll be taken
right.
even less seriously than I'm already being taken, because the feminine is so terrifying.
And so they
But then
start, and a lot of times those women will start to over embrace that masculine side to
yes, that's exactly
compensate
what I'm
it,
talking about.
to
Yeah.
so that they are, you know, kind of seen as
They're more serious than the other women, but they're still
right.
not getting the recognition
Right,
they
they're still
deserve.
not getting the recognition, and I find it, you know, funny. I mentioned to you at the beginning of the day, or before we went on air, this is Women's Equality Day, and that we're having this conversation, and, you know, it's like, okay, this is, you know, we're celebrating women's equality, but we really don't have it yet. It's really not there.
No, because we still live in such a binary society. We still have such a willingness to embrace the feminine. So, as men cannot express their femininity in whatever form it looks like, and women cannot fully express their femininity, we have a world where it's genuinely dangerous for someone who's labeled a woman at birth to wear a dress, and someone who's labeled a man at birth to be able to wear a dress, however they choose to express themselves through that.
Right.
Because we don't want to accept the fact that we all have masculine and feminine inside of us, and that's part of our fluidity. This is it's a huge problem that we've been marinating in for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's time to end it.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next gate, which is shadow work. And I don't know if you're familiar with shadow work, or
Oh
any of your
yeah.
listeners are familiar with shadow work.
Oh yeah.
It's so important. It's so juicy.
I gotta say that you know, the term was originally coined by Carl Jung,
Yeah.
and the way that he looked at it and stuff, and then the way that it's been taken, I think shadow work is honestly some of the most important things that you can do, just to try to
100%.
heal yourself, and the shadow work. So it's funny because, you know, we work in the realms of spiritual, and spirituality and stuff, and I know that you see the light worker circles and stuff, and they're all about love and light and stuff, and I'm nothing wrong with that, but I also
Sure.
see so many of these people that are in these light worker circles are absolutely terrified of doing any kind of shadow work. They're terrified of stepping into that darkness, and taking a peek at what's there, and starting to, you know, those things that we sweep under the rug, that no, we don't go there. That's, you know, we don't go into that area.
Yes, exactly. I feel like shadow work is really fascinating to me, because I was never introduced to it in a psychological sense, and it's becoming really hip in therapy now, because it's Carl Jung, and because it was kind of pseudo psychology, and then it took off in the spiritual realm, and now therapists are like, wait, shit, this works.
Right.
We should be giving it attention. But for those who don't know, shadow work is all about examining the parts of ourselves that are our shadows, the parts of ourselves that we supposedly, according to society, so we're supposed to be ashamed of. Jealousy, anger, grief, greed. I really love the way that Mary Magdalene's 7 powers and the 7 deadly sins mirror each other, and how she talks about how we have to move into our powers in order to rise up to be one with the divine. And I see so much of shadow work as the process of climbing out of the shadow. And it happens when we admit, which is essentially confession, we admit our confession, I think, is completely shadow work. We admit our mistake. We admit our errors. I don't want to use the word errors. We admit, for lack of a better word, let's say that. Faults. So I'll give an example, actually, before I try to like bumble around with words that I don't really feel like fit correctly.
So, yeah, sometimes it's hard to find the right word for that.
Shadow.
Yeah.
It's shadow.
Right.
I'm jealous of another woman. I feel like she is getting all the work I want. I think she's prettier than me, and I'm super jealous of her, and I'm feeling super envious. Traditional perspectives on jealousy would be to shut it down. Lurie, don't be silly. Put your blinders on. Kick it into full gear. You're on 2 different tracks. Don't worry about her. You do your thing. And that's a lovely sentiment.
Right,
but it's not practical.
Well, that's just bottling it up and kind of tossing it in the closet and saying, well, I'll just try to keep that in there as long as it will stay in there.
Yes. Instead, shadow work is saying, all right, I'm jealous. What is my jealousy teaching me?
Right.
Well, I want what she has, but I don't actually want what she has. I want this also with it. And I think that she's stunning. It's actually because I really love her hair. I'm going to go get my hair done in the same way that she has her hair done because I think it looks really good. I'm going to copy it. And you know what it's also telling me? It's also telling me that what I want, it's pointing me towards my desires, and I'm going to now celebrate this feeling because of it, I am going to rise higher because it's telling me it's time to level up.
Right.
So it's informing me about what I want. And then sometimes it's also informing me about those mother wounds. It might also be informing me about something that I need to address in my own pain and my own grief and my own sorrow in another way that maybe I'm not addressing that I need to go and look at. And one of the reasons I do shadow work after we balance the masculine and the feminine is because when we're able to, I believe in shadow work that can be done, and I teach a form of shadow work that's embodied. It's connected to the movement of the body. And I teach it after we've explored body, and I teach it after we've balanced the masculine and the feminine, because then we learn how to hold space in the masculine for our grief, which is being expressed in the feminine. And we can hold that space for ourselves when we've learned that we actually have the ability to hold space for and provide for ourselves. We don't need another person to necessarily be with us in that process. Not that it's wrong to call a friend and be like, yo, I'm really jealous of this woman. But the best thing to do, I think, is to move in the shadow and dance in the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's shadow work. And then the next tool after shadow work is ancestral work. And because you need to know how to dance in the shadow to deal with your ancestors.
Right.
Because our ancestors have been maintaining thousands of years of patriarchy. And if we're in America, that also means slavery. That also means capitalism. That also means oppressive systems that we are now inherited and we need to deal with. So we deal with the bad of our ancestors and we look at the good of our ancestors.
Right.
The rituals, tarot, the astrology, the spiritual practices that we can take on with them. And so once we're able to hold our ancestors in a way that's honoring and loving them, we start to build rituals that are fully liberating, fully exciting, fully life-giving to us. And then the last step is owning your role as the high priestess of your spirituality. So we've got 8 gates: desire, body, feminine, masculine, shadow, ancestors, ritual, and owning your power. And I believe that when women go through all those 8 gates, then they can actually fully step into their power, not having to look for the approval of a man, but instead being able to look into their own selves and their own souls to be able to own the ground that they stand on.
Exactly. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you've said there. And I even mentioned this in the, I don't know if I actually mentioned it in the last show, but I know I talked to you about it. That myself and another one of my guests, Melvin Nix, have been working on putting together a men's group that we want to address the divine masculine and how the divine masculine looks, how it works, how it operates. And I really, really want to bring you into that when we start doing that, because you have a lot of perspective on things that men need to hear as well. That they need to see, that as far as embracing that divine masculine in and of themselves. And I think it's one of those things that, you know, when just the average guy out there comes in contact with a woman who has really embraced the divine feminine, it's intimidating. It can be intimidating. And I've seen that in guys who will be like, whoa, and just kind of shy back away, and it's because they don't know how to handle a really strong, empowered, powerful woman.
Well, I'll also say sometimes they don't shy away.
Right.
Sometimes they see it as a challenge, and then
something to conquer.
They get violent. Sometimes they get. I mean, I not to say prefer the shying away, because I prefer every man to stand in their power as well. But I feel safer with the shying away, maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, because that other instinct would be, instead of shying away, would be to try to look at that and control or dominate it, and
yes,
and like we said earlier, conform it to what they want it to be.
Right. Which is part of the learning about the masculine and the High Priestess Path, and also part of standing in your power. Because when men, I had a really fascinating interaction today that I feel like you'll so appreciate, where I've been posting about tarot and how I do tarot, because I'm going to be doing it. I'm going to be teaching tarot in the High Priestess Path, along with other practices, as we dabble our toes into different rituals that we can incorporate into our life. But some dude DM'd me and was like, watch out for tarot. That invites evil spirits into the world, into your life. And I was like, okay. So I sent him a book. I said, you know what? If you're interested in tarot, you should read this book. And he just kept going on and on and on at me. And he wrote me basically a book about how he's never done tarot. He's never practiced psychic practices, but he wants to let me know that it invites evil spirits into your life. And I don't know because I can't possibly know what I'm dealing with. Right. I teach shadow, but he wants to tell me about the darkness.
I really imagine he's probably really never studied into it at all, beyond just what some guy standing behind a pulpit has said to him about it.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
What was even more interesting is he was like, I've seen ghosts, I've seen scary things. And I'm like, well, this tells me that you probably should do a little bit of research into divination to know how to handle that shit. Because it sounds like you don't really know what you're doing. But I found it really fascinating that even as I continued to be nice and just say, oh, here's a book you can read, or here's this, he insisted that he had more information than I did, that I clearly must not know what I'm doing. And it was one of those moments that I'm thinking about sharing it in my Facebook group. Of course, I would erase his name. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I would share it just to be like, there are times when men will not shy away, when they will go full force trying to convince you that you need them to give you spiritual guidance. You are clearly being led astray. And to know that you don't have to respond to that in a way that you need to. Ultimately, how I ended it was I said, if you want to read this book, great. If you want to set up a time to do a one-on-one with me, we can certainly set that up to talk about patriarchy and divination. Have a great day. And sometimes they don't stop.
Right.
But the whole way is saying, I have created the boundary, and this is the boundary, and you can't pass it. And that's also where male allies come in. When you have male allies in your life who are aligned in their masculine and feminine, sometimes you need one of them to step in.
Yeah.
And sometimes that only happens.
It's kind of funny that you said that, because I work a lot with plant medicines, and during one of my plant medicine journeys, I was specifically called out that I needed to step up in speaking about the divine feminine and the role of the divine feminine, that there's not enough men stepping up into this position and speaking out about it in a sacred way, and it's not that I need to go tell women about it, because women will get it as soon as it's brought up, but it is bringing it to the forefront of the men and the masculine out there that needs to realize what this is, and to honor it, and to see the sacredness of it, and to see that, you know, it's not all about the man, it's not all about the masculine, it's not all about the patriarchy, and that honestly that has done a lot of harm. That point of view.
And, well, I love that you're. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And I was going to say, and at the same time, it needs to be a balance of the masculine and the feminine, because if you go too much into the matriarchy, it can become overbearing as well.
Well, you have a new hierarchy.
Right. And so it's about bringing them into a balance and keeping that balance there together, where they're not codependent, they coexist.
Yes, exactly. It's so interesting that you say that, because one of my holy discontents, my rages, has been often, there's a new movement going on that I predominantly work in called the deconstruction and reconstruction space, where people are spiritually deconstructing the problematic patriarchal religion that they grew up in, and they're moving into trying to build liberating spirituality. And in that space, very often there are these quote-unquote progressive men who are quoted and shared, who got their ideas from womanist theologians and womanist theorists. If you aren't familiar with the word womanist, it's Black feminism. In a nutshell, it was created by Alice Walker, a term created by Alice Walker about a really deep inclusion of racial justice within the feminist movement. And it's created as a response to racism in the feminist movement by women, white women. So they're quoting womanists, these theologians, these academic white men. They're referencing these women, but they're not citing them. They're not giving them credit for this information and this knowledge. And then these men are standing up as beacons and leaders of this new movement, when nothing that they have to say wasn't taught to them by a Black woman. And it's this really intense, high level of patriarchy that I guess I shouldn't be surprised about, but I get very frustrated.
It really is. The way that you explain that, it really is another level of patriarchy, of that, well, this is, you know, they got to be the one that has that knowledge, that they're the one teaching it, that they're the one that's bringing this to the forefront, instead of going, hey, look at this, look at what this woman said, look at the teachings that she brought, look at this knowledge that she brought to us, and that is very important. And, you know, it's just one of those things that it baffles me to see the way even that oppression goes on, even like you said, within that movement, of where they're supposed to be coming at it as an ally, but it's kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing coming in, going, hey, let me sneak into the flock and kind of infiltrate and say what I gotta say.
Exactly. And I think it's that what I was talking about in the beginning. It's the villain moving into the role of the hero, instead of leaving the trichotomy and letting women figure out how they're going to liberate themselves and step into their own power and their own liberation. Instead, it's a process of men saying, oh, women have been oppressed, let me save them. And that's still patriarchy.
Right.
It's still patriarchy.
Right.
I get it a lot when I get people DMing me arguments for women's ordination. And shocker, I don't actually believe that women should be ordained, because I think that we should dismantle the institution. We shouldn't participate in it. If you're a woman who wants to get ordained, I will support that. but know that I'm working very hard to dismantle the institution in which you will be employed at.
I was going to say, just so we clarify on that, by what you're
Yeah.
saying, is that men shouldn't be ordained either. We just need to get rid of
Oh,
that
no.
all across the
I think
board.
we need to tear down I think we need to take apart the institution, and we need to rebuild something
And
liberating.
see, I agree with that. While I'm actually working on becoming ordained within and let me go ahead and say why I'm doing this.
I know many pastors and priests who also believe the institution should be dismantled as well, so I'm not surprised.
Well, here's the thing: is the reason that I'm doing it is honestly for the legality of being able to perform ceremonies for people that such as funerals and marriages and stuff along those lines, with
Sure.
that legal authority. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is my calling and the path. Not any kind of ordination makes any difference on
Where are you
who
getting
I
ordained?
am. I'm going through the Oklahoma Native American Church, through the Peaceful Mountain Way
Okay.
branch of the Oklahoma Native American Church. It's an interfaith church.
Okay.
And
So it's not the Catholic Church, it's
No,
not the
no,
UCC, it's not the
no.
Episcopal Church, the Lutheran Church.
No.
That's actually who I'm talking about dismantling.
Well,
But,
I think the whole idea of being ordained across the board just needs to be eliminated and eradicated, though, in my opinion, because my lighting just went crazy. Hold on a second.
I thought like a window just opened or something super.
No, I've got some studio lights in front of me, and
Got it.
they're on remote, and every now and then they'll just go crazy, and that one just went super bright.
They'll decide what they want to do.
Yeah, but who are these people at the end of the day that says, "Oh, you're meant to be a pastor, or you're meant to be in this role of spiritual leadership, and this person's not"?
Well, exactly. That's one of the reasons why I think it's a problem. And there's a woman named Elizabeth Schistler Fiorenza, who is one of the forerunners of feminist biblical interpretation. And she was one of the first writers to argue against the verses that are used to argue against women's ordination. And she reinterpreted them. She looked at them at their historical context and has made really solid arguments that are the ones that are predominantly used today to say that the Bible does not say women can't be ordained. Right. You know her?
No, but I have a great book that kind of goes along that same way. That was a suggestion from the minister at the Peaceful Mountain Way, where I'm going through to get ordained.
Cool.
And it's called Why Not Women?
Okay.
And it's a fresh look at scripture on women in missions, ministry, and leadership. And it's by Lauren Cunningham and David Joel Hamilton with Janice Rogers. And the funny thing is, it's written by Youth with a Ministry Publishing, which is a very, very evangelical Christian.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's got a lot of
trendy, a little bit.
It's got a lot of that evangelical stuff in there, so you got to wade through that. But then it also gets into talking about some of the scriptures that Paul used that talked about the women in control and leaderships and stuff in the church, and what they really were supposed to mean. Like when he said women shouldn't speak in the church, or women shouldn't teach in the church, it wasn't that he was saying all women. He was calling out one specific woman who was actually doing things wrong.
Right.
And
so all those ideas, go ahead. So all those ideas that you're talking about were created by were discovered and argued originally by Elizabeth Schistler Fiorenza.
Okay, excellent. It's great to know that.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're not citing her. But she wrote, for those who are listening.
I haven't seen them cite her, but yeah.
For those who are interested, her book is called In Memory of Her. And it's a lovely book.
I'm actually going to write this down so I can pick it up and take a look at it.
Cool. A lot of people consider it really dense, and that was the biggest critique she received. But she has this fabulous story about how she was at a conference and all these men were critiquing that your book is too dense, it's too complicated for people to read, it's never going to take off. And this woman stood up and she goes, I don't know what any of you are talking about, but I've never even gone to college. And this is the second time I've read this book. I got together a group of women from my neighborhood who were all getting together, who also never went to college. And we all understand the book perfectly fine. So I'm not sure what's wrong with all of you. And her whole point is that so much of what she's saying, women already knew.
Right.
Like there's a truth that she's speaking to that women don't need to be argued. She's just basically saying this verse is bullshit, and we're like, got it. I don't really need to understand the rest of your lines about why, because I knew it was bullshit. I
Right.
get it.
And see,
I know what you're talking about.
I always had trouble with a lot of those teachings that when you got into reading some of the stuff that Paul wrote about, I always struggled with a lot of those things because they just didn't seem to fit to me. And especially
Sure.
when he's talking about the role of women in the church, I'm looking back through, my experiences and my knowledge and stuff that I have dove into, and it's like, well, women were the spiritual
The spiritual
leaders,
leader.
and
Yeah.
it's funny because you look at the archaeologically, we see some of the earliest spiritual leadership that has been done in archaeological studies of the shamans coming out of Siberia. Well, the shamans weren't men, they were women.
Right.
And then, you go into the Norse and the Nordic beliefs, the vulva, who were the
Right.
wise women. They were the witches. They were, and they were held in a position that even the rulers, the jarls or the kings and stuff, did not have the ability to tell them what to do. And that if they
Right.
wanted to walk into a jarl's longhouse and sit on his throne, the Jarl was to get up and get the hell out of the way. That person had a higher authority than he did.
Right. There's so many ways that's a whole interesting history about how Christianity came into the Nordic world and really steamrolled that. But
Yeah.
it's really amazing how women have been leaders for so long, and I think we kind of know it in a soul memory. But one of the things I wanted to say about Elizabeth Schistler Fiorenza is I was in a class with her, and in class she said she does not believe that women should be ordained. And I looked at her and I was like, Elizabeth, what are you saying? You're the one that everyone points to. Like,
Right.
what do you mean? And she said, no, I've been here far too long. She's at Harvard Divinity. She's like, for those who know, like that's a school that ordains people in multiple different denominations. And she says, and a lot of them are progressive people who are coming through there. She says, I've been with too many women, seen too many women get ordained after divinity school and just become the servants of the church, and not like it's nice for being servant leaders, like the stepping stones, the dirt, considered
Right.
dirt to the church leadership because they're women. And it's not that women pastors are equal to male pastors in these progressive quote unquote denominations. They're given, and this is also true for many queer pastors as well. They're given the failing churches. They're given the part-time job churches. They're given the jobs that the cis white dudes don't want.
Right.
And so they just end up becoming the sub thing. She's like, it's going to be the same thing as when women were allowed to be deacons. Now deacons wasn't a prestigious position anymore, and every man had to become a priest, and women deacons became kicked around when men deacons weren't. She's like, I don't believe it. We need to get rid of the patriarchy in the institution. We need to kill the institution. We shouldn't be allowing women to just participate more deeply in an oppressive system that doesn't value them. And I looked at her and I said, Elizabeth, you're a radical. And she goes, she's German. Am I a radical? No. I believe in equality. That's not radical.
But honestly, the sad thing is believing in equality has become being radical.
It has become radical. And so, because in order to have it, we've gotten so bad that in order to have equality, we need to so drastically change the system that we've allowed to develop.
Right.
So I don't believe that women should be ordained. And the whole point of this story was that I'll have men DM me giving me videos about why they think women should be ordained, or their edicts about why they think women should be ordained. And they're like, you see, I'm here to save you. I'm so nice. And I'm like, I don't believe in this. I don't agree with this. And I think you've never read anything I've posted. And I don't think you're listening to my videos and you're not paying attention because you think I believe in women's ordination. So either I'm not making that very clear to you or you're not reading.
Right.
And I think that there's a way in which men put themselves in the role of hero because that's toxic masculinity. That's not healing their feminine.
Right.
And they end up missing out on really, really, really saving themselves because they keep looking for a victim to save instead of realizing that they're the victim that needs to be saved. They're the villain, they're the victim, they're their own hero.
Mm-hmm.
She's not your victim to save.
Right.
You're your victim to save. So that's the healing of the masculine. That's the healing of the feminine.
And I, from the perspective that you presented, I agree on the ordination, really, because at the end of the day, it's, especially how you talked about, and I've seen it, where, someone becomes ordained and they're sent to some real small backwater church where no one's going to say anything. They're basically, putting
sequestered.
Putting them where they can kind of cover them up, and they're not going to get the attention. They're not going to be in the limelight. They're not going to be getting any of that. And
well, they're also not going to get paid because those
Right.
are going to be poor churches, and pastors get paid through tithing, so they're
Right.
not going to get paid a living wage. They're not going to get they're not going to be able to, or they don't get hired full time because the church can't afford to hire them full time. And so it's really just the jobs that people don't want.
Right. And I mean, we've seen some women that get ordained rise up into more prominent positions.
Oh, 100%.
It happens. I mean, even in the area where I live, there's a really prominent female pastor. She runs a very large church. She's really well known, really well respected.
Sure.
But it also isn't one of those really mainstream theological churches either. It's more of like that full gospel, non-denominational, where there's really no central leadership over it that said, oh, you can be this. She just,
that's interesting.
She got ordained and she rose to that position because she stood in her own power.
Sure.
So
I mean, it'd be interesting to hear her perspective on that and to know who she was, because I would imagine she also had to suppress some femininity in order to be able to get there too.
And see if I can get in touch with her. It's someone that honestly, I know her in the community. I've never really attended her church.
Sure.
I'm not really big on attending church per se.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, because the other thing that I was thinking as you were talking about this is a little statistics. This is done in, I think this was 2016, but I could be wrong about that. Study that looked at women's roles in church denominations. And in the US, only 12% of women's leadership roles, and that includes any type of church leadership roles, is given to women. Only 12%. And when we look specifically at only progressive churches, it's 25%. And when you look even more at the higher levels of leadership, like the bishops, the denominational boards, and like the higher levels within the denomination, it drops so low. I think it goes down to like 8% or something like that. So if you can think of a woman in a leadership role, I am so happy.
And part of that,
but that's not equality.
No. But part of me probably also wonders that in those statistics and in those numbers, how many of the quote unquote women in leadership roles are, well, she's over top of the children's ministry.
That's another question as well. And then the other question I have is, how much of that woman's femininity did she need to sacrifice in order to be able to get that role?
Right.
So many of the women in church leadership, not all, I immediately thought of my priest. She's incredible. But I think there's so many women in church leadership who are very, very, very masculine, and they have a toxic relationship with femininity. Women who end up really, really, really harming other women who are trying to get where they are, because they're trying to, psychologically, I think there's like a sense where they're trying to protect them. It's like, you can't wear that. You're going to be hurt. You can't dress so feminine. You're not going to be taken seriously. And even if they are cognizant of it and saying that out loud, it's the act of sacrificing the feminine in order to be respected by the patriarchy.
Well, it's the same thing that we see with, the whole issue of things like rape and sexual assault, it's, oh well, she shouldn't have been dressed that way, she shouldn't have looked that way,
Right.
or what they do is, where you see them.
I'm grabbing my water, but I'm
Okay,
listening.
go for it. When they bring up these issues, it's teaching women how to avoid being in those situations where they're assaulted or anything. But you don't hear people telling guys, hey, learn to respect her. Learn to say, hey, she may be dressed really provocatively, but that doesn't mean that I have the right to go do whatever I want.
She doesn't exist for you. Her femininity doesn't exist for you to consume.
Right.
And that goes into what Audre Lorde talked about, and this is kind of going into the sacred and sexual. It goes into Audre Lorde's ideas of the uses of the erotic. And for those who haven't read the uses of the erotic, that is your assignment. It's so important. Audre Lorde is a womanist theorist. She passed away in, I think, the early 2000s, but she might have passed away a little in the after 2010. But she was an incredible woman who wrote this text called The Uses of the Erotic is Power. And she talks about how we have two understandings, is that there is this idea of the pornographic, which she calls the pornographic. And we have decided that you look at the erotic and we call it pornographic. We've been unable to understand the difference. So when Eros, well, let me first define erotic. Eros is the Greek god of passion and desire. So for the Greeks, if you saw a gorgeous woman, it wasn't, I must own her. It was, who is she?
Right.
It was that yearning towards her that led you higher and closer to the divine. It led you to Eros, which led to Aphrodite, this divine, beautiful, gorgeous entity. And you can read Symposium to learn more about that. This is what Eros is. And we instead have sequestered Eros to the sexual, and it is turned to the pornographic. It's the plasticized sensation, as she calls it. It is this belief that instead of the sexual bringing us to life, it gets us off. It doesn't turn us on, it turns us off. And it gives us that satiated pleasure that doesn't really feed our souls. And so that is the pornographic. And so what we end up doing is we see a beautiful person across the street or across the bar or on Bumble or wherever you are, and you don't go, oh my goodness, what is their name? How is their day going? What can I do to talk to that person and be closer to them? And then maybe touch their arm. Oh, but if I get to touch their arm, oh, maybe they'll hug me. Or, oh, if they hug me, then maybe they'll kiss me. And then after they kiss me, what levels of the divine will I encounter because of that? And if you don't believe in the divine, what levels of something greater than myself will I get to experience by connecting to another human being? Instead, we go, oh, that they're hot, I want to come.
Right.
And it's disconnected from humanity. So we then take the sexual, and if we consider it sacred, we consider it something we cannot do until we're married. And if we consider it holy, if we consider it evil, it's also something we can't do. And in my graduate thesis, I talked about how purity culture has created a pornographic understanding of sex in general.
Oh,
and purity culture, for those who don't know, is the culture of telling teenagers and 13-year-olds that they can't have sex until they're married, making them make vows of celibacy until they're married, and it's been a shit show ever since. So what we've done is we've turned every form of male attraction into the pornographic. So we tell men that if you're attracted to a woman, it's lust, and it's wrong, and it's sinful, and it's evil. And they tell women that if a man is attracted to you, it's because you've tempted him into lusting, and it's wrong, and it's evil.
Right.
After marriage, the relationship does not become erotic. He owns her now, and he is able to lust and objectify her as much as he wants. The erotic is never present because the woman's sexual agency never exists. But even if it does exist, in some versions of this understanding it does, it's not honored as equally as learning and connecting to the erotic through her relationship with a man, it's only seen as what the translation is. And I specifically looked at a book by Joshua Harris called Sex Isn't the Problem, Lust Is, in my thesis. Joshua Harris also has a very interesting story in and of himself. But he talks about how women are tempted to tempt our desire to tempt men, and men are tempted to have sex with women. So then after marriage, this dichotomy doesn't change. She's still trying to use him for emotional satisfaction, and he's still trying to use her to get off. Only now they're married, so it's okay.
Right.
And it's like, no, it's not. That's not a good marital relationship.
No,
That's
it'd be
really bad.
Right, because I mean, first off, they've taken the whole level of the sacredness of what sex is out of the equation totally and completely. You know,
it's only sacred because they're following a rule.
Right. And if they're doing it out of marriage, then they're bad, and it's one of those things that for me, I go back to, like going back to like Isis and the sex magic of Isis and the work in the temples of, what they would refer to as the temple prostitute or the sacred slut. And the work that those women done within the temples was considered sacred, and it was holy, and it was something that was honored and worshipped. And then that changed.
I want to point everyone to the book Sacred Prostitution in the Ancient World.
I was going to say,
it's red.
I've got this one here too, the Sacred Prostitute, which is a really good one too.
Nice.
And this one is actually done it's written by Nancy Qualls Covert, who is a Jungian analyst. So she takes it from that same point of Carl Jung's analysis and breaks down into this book and talks about it, and it's beautiful. It's a great book.
I think the book I'm thinking of is called Laura McClure. I have the PDF of it, and of course I only saved it as the prostitute book, so I don't actually know the name of it.
If you end up
the introduction is done by Laura McClure. I'll send it to you. I'll look it up. I'll try to figure out where I got it from. Obviously, I downloaded it from the library because I don't have the title of it. But it's really great, and it talks about the ways that so often we talk about the temple prostitutes as if they were like these women who were forced into prostitution, but these were these women who were they were priestesses.
Yes.
And they tended to the fertility goddesses.
Right.
And it was believed if you interacted with sex with them that they were going to lead like to a blessing for you. And it was specific positions. I mean, if you go to the Pergamon in Berlin, there are these statues of sexual positions. And many archaeologists suggest that these were like, if you want this, you have sex in this position. If you want this, you have sex in this position. And even more fascinating is sometimes we even see it as something evil in terms of them. Sometimes they weren't even having sex with these people in society. Sometimes they were only having sex with priests. And it's like, okay, we'll go have sex and talk to the goddess,
right,
while having sex, and then your harvest will be good. And so there's this ways that sex was understood as a deeply connective, divine way that we encountered the divine. And this is John Paul II, the Pope, is not the person I'm going to go to talk about women being great. But when he talks about the theology of the body in his sermons on the theology of the body, he talks about this. He talks about when two people, he's talking about a man and a woman in marriage.
Right.
So it's homophobic and restrictive and all these problems.
Right. And falling within their rules that they have set.
The rules. But he talks about, but because it's the Catholic Church and they still believe that a husband and a wife are bones of their bones and flesh of their flesh, he's talking about being this uniting connection of the Imago Dei. He's talking about sex being the perfect image of God. Yes, the Pope said that. The Pope. So it's very, not Francis, the conservative one.
Right.
And it's really, I think, important to realize that that's not radical. That
No.
is
Well,
just good old traditional Catholicism.
and it seems like I stashed all these books next to me, but I didn't. These are
I'm assuming you keep your books near wherever you record.
well, yeah. I mean, this is my office, and so I've got my books are here, and there's some behind me, and there's some over here and stuff. I've got books all around me and stuff of different things I study.
Or
And
if you're anything like me, pre-nomading, your books were just scattered around your house, and that's
well,
how you
that
normally
happens too. I've got 4 or 5 books laying on the on the table next to my bed. I've got some out in the front room and stuff too, but they're all over the place. But another book, the Magdalene manuscript,
Oh, yes.
The Alchemies of Horus and the Sex Magic of Isis, by Tom Kenyon and Judy Sion. And there, the message that was delivered by Mary Magdalene was talking about the sacredness of sex and the sex magic of Isis, that this union between her and Yeshua, which is Jesus for those of you who don't know that terminology, but she uses his Hebrew name of Yeshua, that it was the magic and stuff that they worked together in their union and in all of this was to strengthen the Ka, or the spirit body. It was the union of this sex and what they work together within this sex magic, as she talks about it, was to strengthen the spirit, and specifically to help him strengthen his spirit for what he was about to endure through what he was about to go through with his crucifixion and everything as well.
That's interesting. I have a traditional view of Mary Magdalene, and I have a historian's view of Mary Magdalene, I should say, which doesn't try to disparage the views of the sacredness of sex at all. I think that there's so much that the mystical interpretations of Mary Magdalene have offered in terms of the sacredness of sexuality, but I'm not as familiar about it, only because I have come to take a very historical view of Mary Magdalene, but I love the mystical interpretations because I agree with them very often.
I study deeply into Mary Magdalene because I really believe that she is meant to be the feminine counter to the masculine of Christ. And that perspective of the duality and the wholeness, that what Christ was as far as a masculine man, as a divine masculine male, Mary embodied as the divine feminine.
I do understand that. I think people talk about that. I did a podcast about this as well, and it's really fascinating to me, because I see Jesus as the perfect composite of the masculine and the feminine. Because I believe that Sophia, Sophia wisdom of Proverbs, was described as this entity that was there. She was there at the beginning of creation, and and all of creation was made through her. And then you have John 1, that talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Word, logos, Sophia wisdom, were used interchangeably in the early texts of the church. Even in Paul's letters, he uses Sophia to refer to Jesus consistently. Now, all the time he's talking about Jesus as Sophia.
I do, if you wouldn't mind, will you go back and kind of explain Sophia and the whole idea of Sophia? Because I have a feeling there's some people out there that's going, what
no
is she
fucking clue what I'm talking
Sophia?
about.
And I guarantee there's people that's grabbing their Bibles, trying to flip through, going, okay, what's this Sophia she's talking about?
Jesus is a woman? Okay, Proverbs 3, Proverbs 8, Proverbs 9, I believe you can also take a look at. These are all of Proverbs, really, but these are specific moments where wisdom is described as a Christ-like figure, and that we are saved through Sophia. That Sophia is what God used, is how God created the world, through wisdom. Through Sophia we are all Sophia's children, that through Sophia we can know God. And all these terminologies that in John 1 are used to explain who Jesus is. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The word in ancient Greek is logos. Now, in Proverbs, they're using Hebrew, but in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, they use the word Sophia. So then you have Paul's letters. So Sophia was this goddess. She was a goddess. image of God. So even though in Judaism you have monotheism, you have this image of Sophia that is understood as part of God. It's almost like how Christians would describe the Trinity,
Right.
where we have these three different aspects of God that all exist in one entity. Sophia was one of those entities. Some people today say Sophia is the Holy Spirit. I disagree, because in John 1, the description of Sophia is used for the word, and we have writings from early church theologians, and I reference these in a blog post that I have called Sophia and Jesus, where they say we can't keep talking about the word as Sophia, or we can't keep talking about Jesus as the incarnation of Sophia, because people are going to think we're worshiping a goddess. And we're not. We're monotheistic. So we have to keep Jesus male, because people will think that this is goddess worship, and people will get confused and they'll think we're not monotheistic. And they felt that it was an easier argument for the Trinity to ignore Sophia.
But see, to me, I mean, if you really want to look at the Christian belief of God and the figure of God, you know, it's often referred to in the Bible as the Father. It's given a very masculine perspective a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it seems really foolish to not see God as the duality of both masculine and feminine at the same time.
Oh, of course. You know, and the interesting thing is that ancient Israel did.
Right.
And early Christians did. This was the beginning of that break, because they didn't. Because also, if you read the writings of the councils of Nicaea, some people were saying, no, there's three gods. And some people were arguing that, well, there's Jesus, and then there's the Holy Spirit and God, and that's one thing. And other people were making all these other arguments. And so by acknowledging Sophia, it really messed up the monotheism of Christianity that they were fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that Jesus is the full duality of the masculine and feminine incarnate. And I don't really care about Jesus's penis. Like, I'm not really interested.
Right.
And the only thing that I push against the idea that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were married, this is my only push against it, is that she's never talked about as married to Jesus in the Gnostic Gospels or in the biblical Gospels. She's talked about as his consort. But I feel like she was such an incredible, amazing theological figure, and she said so many amazing things, and her gospel is so gorgeous, and the writings about her in the Gospel of Thomas are incredible, that I'm just like, why do we want to talk about who she had sex with?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, does that really matter? I mean,
does that
change the idea of who they really were?
No, I don't think it does. And I think it makes it...
And like, even in that book that I brought up, where it was talking about that, it's interesting whether, because it's supposed to, the Magdalene manuscript's supposed to be a channel message that came...
Oh, yeah, that's why I said mysticism.
Right.
And I'm not trying to say I deny its validity, because when I read it, I was like, well, I don't disagree with anything you're saying in terms of truth about the divine.
Right.
I concur.
But what I find is more important is take away the names Yeshua and Mary Magdalene and put any man and woman into the roles that is talked about in there.
Right.
The message that is being delivered is still the same. It's still talking about how that sacredness of that union and what it really means and how they work together. And one of the greatest things in there is just how they talk about it's not for the benefit of just the man. Like, in there, it talks about how, yes, this was to help prepare Yeshua for his trials that he was to come into. But it was preparing Mary as well for her trials that she was to come into as well. And like I said, you can change these for either, but it was the key of it was that when they enter into this sacred union, into this sacred sexual magic that they work together with, and the way they done this, it strengthened their spirit body. It strengthened their spirit and brought them closer to the divine through that process.
Well, that's also how Isis is described with Osiris,
Right.
that it is their sex
Yes.
that is part of his resurrection.
Yes.
And the other thing I find so fascinating, so I have a book that's going to be coming out soon.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
I'll be posting. It's going to be an ebook.
Okay.
And it's hopefully leading up to another book. It's called She Who Resurrects,
Okay.
The Story of Life, Death, and Resurrection Through the Divine Feminine.
Oh.
And
please, when you release that, drop me a line, let me know. I want to get a copy of it, and I would love to have you on the show to specifically promote and push it when you're ready for that too.
Well, what I think is so incredible that I argue in that book is that if you look at the cults of early Greco-Roman period and what they believed, Dionysus's cults, Persephone's cults, Cybele cults, and Attis cults, and Isis cults, all of these had a narrative of life, death, and resurrection, including Christianity, that required the presence of the divine feminine in order to have the resurrection. Now, I'm sure y'all are thinking, what do you mean? There's no divine feminine in the Gospels. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, sir, there is.
I'm excited.
So we have, what are the two biggest holidays in Christianity?
Easter and Christmas.
Right. The birth of Jesus, Mary.
Right.
And Easter, the resurrection of Jesus, the presence of Mary Magdalene.
Right.
And then there's two other essential narratives in the Gospels that are what we point to say Jesus is Christ. Like, this story lets us know that Jesus is Christ. When he reveals his Christness, I just created a word, to the woman at the well.
Right.
The presence of the woman at the well. And when he is anointed on Holy Week. In the Gospels, there's three different narratives. One is when a woman cries with her tears and cleans his feet, which is often attributed to Mary Magdalene historically. When a woman named Mary anoints his head with oil.
Right.
And when a woman anoints his feet with perfumes. But all three of those moments are a moment of anointing.
Right.
With her grief, with her wailing, which is shadow work, spiritual shadow work of honoring the darkness of death, and was practice of women that was used for the tool of communal resurrection. The women grieved for the community,
right? Did
the collective grieving. And ointment, healing ointment, and anointing him as Christ, and anointing him as king and as a prophet, which is other things that are traditional.
Right.
So the feminine anointing.
Right. And there's a lot
that
of
magic.
I was going to say, and there's a lot of people go back to the whole deal of the anointing of the head. I've heard that attributed to Mary Magdalene a lot, and
it's often attributed to Mary Magdalene as well.
And if you really look at it, whether it was Mary Magdalene or not, whatever woman done that was not just a common woman. She anointed him.
She was powerful.
Yeah, she anointed him in the way a high priest or a high priestess, let's use the right word.
But in Israel, it would have been a high priest, so she was quite literally taking on a male role.
But if you look, that if it was a woman that had traveled from Egypt, she would have been doing the same role as a high priestess would have anointed a pharaoh or a king, and she was doing it in the same manner. And even when you look at when Mary Magdalene helped prepare Christ's body after his death, after the crucifixion, the knowledge that she had in preparing his body and the way they wrapped him in the shroud and with the different ointments and stuff that, and different herbs and everything that they wrapped him in with that, it was in the tradition of a high priestess that would have done that.
Where is that information from? Where can we find that?
Because
I know that's not in the Bible. It's not in one of the Gnostic texts either.
No, I've got to look in where I came across that. It might have been some of it talked about in the Magdalene manuscript, but I've read it in a few other places as well, because that wasn't the first place. But if I remember right, Mary was supposed to be involved in the preparation of his body.
Well, so it was women's work.
Right.
Death was a space for women in ancient Israel. So whether it was connected to Egypt or not, that's what women did.
Right.
Women prepared the bodies. Women covered the bodies with herbs. And that's what the women were doing when they were going to the tomb. They were covering the body with herbs. And in all of these cult practices, women are the birthers, They are the signal points that says this is divinity. They announce the divinity of the divine that will resurrect. They grieve the death of the the one who will die and be resurrected at the death.
Mm-hmm.
And then they witness the resurrection.
Right.
In all of these cults, women are the essential ingredient to the life, death, and resurrection pattern.
Right.
So I personally believe that the life, death, and resurrection, whatever religion you're participating in, if you believe in life, death, and resurrection, the divine feminine is central to that narrative of what must happen. And that's what our ancients knew. And a lot of people hear the similarities between the cults and Jesus, and they see it as evidence that Christianity is bullshit. I see it as evidence that there was a understanding, there was something percolating in humanity at this time where we were understanding this power of resurrection.
Right. And I find it, like you said, it was, if you look at it, it's that very same similar story across all these different areas. And in different cultures and in different perspectives, you see the same narrative of how this works, but yet so much of that gets swept under the rug and they don't want to address that.
Well, it's scary. It's scary for a man, whether it be men in leadership or men individually, to admit that they need someone, because they're not supposed to need someone. And hence it goes full circle back to the fact that men don't want to cry in front of women or other men even. There's a lack of fear of, I think we have a culture. There's something that people talk about a lot about how we're all interdependent on one another. And I think that's true. But I heard this quote recently that said, we have to go from dependent, women must go from dependent to independent to interdependent. And I think we all need to do that, because I think men often talk about justice thinking that they're independent, and they don't realize that they're actually still dependent on women. And we need to, in order to have your balance, you need to find yourself as independent, right, so that we can be interdependent.
This brings up a song that it's a song that I absolutely love, and I don't know if you've heard it or not. I might have sent a link over to you for it. It's a song by a group called The Who. It's HU.
Okay, I know The Who.
The Mongolian band.
Wait, no. So I'm thinking WHO.
No.
Sorry.
Not the old British band.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Of course I know who The Who is.
This is The Who. It's HU, and they're a Mongolian rock band. But they done a song with Lizzie Hale from Hailstorm called A Woman's Song. And it goes through, and the lyrics in it talk about that, everyone sings the song of a woman because everyone comes from a woman. Nothing in creation, and it even goes, there's comments about how, the animals sing the song of a woman because they all come from a female. There is not birth, there is not creation without that.
Or we come from Mother Earth.
Right.
And yes, I think
I will,
that there is
I will send you a
so
link
essential
to that song afterwards, because I have a feeling that you will really, really enjoy it. And it's really, in my opinion, it's really an empowering song to the divine feminine, the way that it's presented and stuff. And it's done beautifully.
Yeah.
If I didn't think that I would get flagged for DMCA violations, I'd actually just play
you'll
it
definitely
on air.
Will be completely muted. No,
Yeah.
It's fine. Don't do it. Yes, I think I 100% think that there is, I think what we do agree on 100%, whether we're following a historical narrative of Mary Magdalene or not, or following a mystical one, is the beauty that the symbiotic relationship between the masculine and feminine is within the narrative of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not separate from the narrative of Jesus. It's not something I feel so strongly about is I think so many women get harmed from a patriarchal theology that they feel like they have to abandon this concept of Jesus or this concept of Mary or Mary Magdalene or all these beautiful things that they love and they appreciate, because they're told, no, it's not there. If you want to honor the divine feminine, you cannot be this anymore. And the actual truth is that no, we need to be something new. And in the book Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Waterson, which is an incredible book.
I think I've got that sitting on the shelf behind me. I haven't got to reading it yet.
Oh, she's an incredible scholar. She talks about how when people ask her if she's a Christian, she says no. But she says, actually, though, there's J.K. Chesterton talks about how there's a Christianity just hasn't been tried yet. And I agree with her. And she says, if I am a Christian, I'm the type of Christian that hasn't been tried yet. I'm the type of Christian that honors the divine feminine and celebrates the beauty of her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I answer the question. I'm stealing that, Megan. If I am a Christian, I am a Christian that honors the divine feminine. So there's a lot of people who are going to say I'm not. That dude that DM'd me about how I was inviting evil spirits for doing tarot, he said he's like, clearly you're not a Christian anymore. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then at the same time,
it's like, thank you for knowing who I am without even really knowing who I am.
Well, that too. But then I also think it's really funny because some women will reach out to me and they're like, well, I'm not really Christian. Can I do your programs? And I'm like, I don't know if I'm Christian either. So
I've actually gotten to the point of claiming any religion, and I'm just like, I'm spiritual. That's where it is. I have a spiritual connection with a divine source.
Mm-hmm.
And in this, I see the aspect of honoring the divine masculine and the divine feminine and their roles together. And everything else in between that is, like the rituals and stuff. There's very much importance into those rituals and stuff, like what you was talking about. And actually, would you mind touching a little bit? I know we're getting close to the end of the show and stuff, but would you mind touching just a little bit on the importance of the rituals and stuff as well?
Oh, yeah. You mean in Christianity or just in spirituality in general?
Both.
Okay.
Because they have aspects, and I think so many people don't understand what these rituals mean. And like the gentleman that contacted you and it's like, oh well, you're gonna invite demons for doing tarot. Well, excuse me.
Tarot is based on Christian mysticism and is a bunch of pictures we find in churches. So unless churches are also inviting the devil in. Yeah, I feel like, okay, so what do I want to say? Well, I find that, so I was raised fundamentalist evangelical. And personally for me, I struggle going to church. Even if it is a super progressive, I don't even want to go to like a Unitarian Universalist church. I don't like it. And not because there's anything wrong with them. In fact, I joke that the moment I walk into the church, if someone turns and says, hi, it's so good to see you here. What's your name? I'm going to be like, I'm not joining your cult. Not joining it. Not joining it. And they're like, would you like some coffee? I'm like, I know what you're doing.
I'm not drinking your Kool-Aid, okay?
Yeah. No, I'm not. So I find myself going to churches where I can sit in the back and just enjoy the rituals and no one's going to talk to me. Right. That's what I want. I want to take a lemon square and leave. Like I don't want to like hang out. That's because of my own trauma, right? That's because of the trauma of growing up. That's church trauma. It's real. It's a phenomenon. A lot of people are dealing with it.
I mean, last night with Liz Foy, we was discussing during her conversation about Reiki and stuff. She kept bringing up some of the stuff about religious trauma and religious, from the church trauma and stuff, and how that really affected her when she started stepping into energetic work. And the impact that it had, and that she had to heal from that trauma to be able to step into that work fully.
Yeah. So there's this level, there's a way in which, I still can't go to church, but I love the rituals.
Yeah, see, I'm the same way.
I love the Eucharist.
Yeah, I struggle so much going into the church and stuff because someone's going to say, well, do you believe this? Well, I believe many things. There's a lot of things. I look at stuff from, all across the board and all across the spectrum that...
You don't want to have to check boxes.
Yeah, it's like, the minute someone in the church hears me talk about chakras, oh my God, you're evil. Or if I say I do yoga, oh my God, you're evil. You're inviting demons into your life. And I'm just like, yeah.
So I find that when talking about rituals, I feel like there is a sense that ritual is simply a series of actions that you do and repeat that have meaning. So we have our morning rituals where we pour our coffee, maybe turn on the radio and listen to NPR or your local radio station and drink your coffee. And then some people will go wake up their kids. Some people will take their shower, brush their teeth. We all have our rituals, the things that we do that have meaning to our life. Spiritual rituals are rich actions and series of steps that have spiritual meaning to your life. So behind me, I have my altar. I have 3 tarot cards that I'm doing manifestation work with. I have goddess cards. I have sacred geometry cards. I've got some Lady of Guadalupe, some other Mary images. I've got my grandmother's rosary. I've got some flower petals. I've got all sorts of things. This is part of ritual. Mm-hmm. Every morning I wake up, I pull a sacred geometry card. I read what it says, put a crystal on it. I light my sandalwood. I bless the day. I say a Hail Mary, and I brush my teeth. That's a ritual.
Right.
I wake up, say hi to Mary, see what the universe wants to tell me for the day. I spiritually cleanse my aura, and I go wash my body. And that's a ritual. And we can participate in rituals however we need. Some people are afraid of tarot because they see it as communicating with a spirit, and you don't know what spirit you're communicating with. My response to it is then either point blank say Holy Spirit, so that you can be clear about who you're calling on if you're really nervous about it, or don't call for a spirit.
Right.
Just shuffle them and see what falls out. And to me, I think that goes back to the belief of chance and the idea that God communicates to us through chance. If you were raised fundamentalist, I'm sure you were told, open the Bible to a random page and see what verse pops out. That's using chance to communicate with the divine. It's a ritual. And so tarot is just another form of ritual. Astrology is a form of ritual if you're using it as a form of ritual. So I have an app that dings every morning at 9 o'clock, and it tells me what my astrology reading is for the day, and it's so on point. And I love it. And I read it, and I consider if I want to make that a part of my day. And then I also ritualize my to-do list. I have processes of ritualizing. I mean, I'm so spiritual. Everything I do is spiritual. I mean, I believe that running a business is a spiritual practice. So everything I do is spiritual. So I meditate. I make my plans for my business that day based upon my meditation and my tarot reading. And I build my entire day around spiritual ritual. That's kind of how I understand it. Am I tapping onto what you're going for? Do you want me to talk about the history of Eucharist and baptism as well? Or?
I mean, if you'd like to, but I mean, you're really tapping into a lot of that and some of the importance of it too. Of if this, if these rituals speak to you, then where are they really wrong? If these things align with you, where are they really wrong? Like that guy today that you was talking about in the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, he's got an issue with tarot. Guess what? He shouldn't own a tarot deck. He shouldn't pull tarot, and he probably shouldn't go hang out with a tarot reader.
Yeah, I was like, don't practice.
Yeah.
I have a solution for you.
Don't do it. And that's as easy as it is. But for you, tarot speaks to you. It has purpose. It has meaning. So for you, by God, pull that tarot card.
Yes, exactly. And I think by sequestering our spiritual experience to rituals that only a priest can perform, or that can only be performed in specific ways of community, because I just know someone's sitting there being like, anyone can baptize. Yeah, but there's a specific way that baptism has to happen. I can't go baptize myself in the shower whenever I want to, even though baptism is done. There are forms of baptism that I do every full and new moon, where I get in the tub and I baptize myself. But there are ways that we understand like connecting to the divine that we can do on our own. And then there's other things, though, that I do get so fed by the Eucharist. I'm so sad that we still can't do the Eucharist. And so when it's Christmas or it's Easter, or it's any other holiday or random event, I'll go to church and I love taking the Eucharist. Because for me, it's a ritual that has been consistent for 2,000 years that every single Christian, no matter your denomination, no matter who you are, we all participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love it. But some people hate it. That's great. Don't do it.
Right.
Some people are like, isn't it just basically like glorifying cannibalism? And I'm like, yeah, that's also kind of why I like it. And I know that sounds weird, but there's a lot of like historical references to like paganism that I really appreciate about that. So and I think it's cool.
I always think it's neat when you see, at least for me, because I do get into a lot of pagan rituals and stuff as well, and a lot of pagan beliefs. A lot of my spirituality comes from a lot of pagan beliefs, but there's a lot of Christian beliefs mixed into it. There's Hindu beliefs.
Sure.
There's it's for me.
But Christianity is pagan.
It is.
Like, it pretends it's not.
It's
I mean,
funny because
come on.
I mean, yeah, look at all the things that we do around a lot of the holidays. I mean, first off, come on, Easter, that's from Ishtar. Come on.
Well, it's Ishtar, it's from Ostera. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a whole combination of all these different pagan religions
Right.
that we just kind of mishmash together.
And the cute little symbols that we use, while there's the cross for the resurrection, we've got the Easter eggs and we got the bunny rabbits and we got all that stuff. That is all pagan fertility symbols.
Ostera.
Yeah.
It's Isis.
Exactly.
Persephone's day is around the same time as Easter is.
Right.
Dionysus is around Easter too.
And then
it's all.
And then if we look at Christmas, so many of the practices that Christians do on
Christmas trees.
Yeah, that's straight up pagan.
Evergreen.
Exactly.
Straight up pagan.
And decorating the tree, they would take silver and decorate the trees in the woods with that's a pagan ritual.
Good King Wenceslas, the song Good King Wenceslas is a pagan song.
Yeah.
It's a song about like the earth and like the beauty of snow and like the winter solstice. So yes, I think Christianity likes to pride itself in not being pagan. But I kind of feel like if you're Christian, you're pagan. And when pagans say they're not Christians because they're pagan, you're still Christian because Christians are pagan.
Right.
The problem is for me, the problem is the patriarchal theology that permeates through it that needs to be dismembered. In my ideal world, the new frontier is the new frontier of the feminine. We might still do the Holy Eucharist, but we're also going to acknowledge the sacred blood of women.
Yeah.
We might still do the baptism, but we're going to acknowledge the sacred baptism that we all experienced at birth. Right. And blood is holy. It always has been.
Will you, I know we're about to
dive into the sacredness of menstruation?
Yes, please.
Okay. I will, first of all, what I'll say is if you follow the sex positive Christian feminists, we did an 1.5-hour episode about menstruation. So I will touch on this for like 2 minutes.
I tell you what, if you want to come back on and do a more in-depth episode on that, I will have you back to do a more in-depth episode on that because I believe that there is a really beautiful power around that has been lost to menstruation being something that is looked at
dirty.
Yeah, it's dirty, it's disgusting, it's something that, yeah.
I believe, so before I talk about this, I want to say that if you are a woman listening to this and you have a medical problem, if you are experiencing intense cramps or you're experiencing difficulty with pregnancy, do not take anything I'm about to say to trump a medical doctor. Okay, so now that I've said that, I firmly believe that so many of the problems we have with fertility and with menstruation is due to a disconnect from the divine feminine and the sacredness of menstruation. So again, while I don't think that, if you're having trouble getting pregnant, it's not because you have endometriosis, your doctor's wrong. It's because you weren't meditating on your womb enough. No, take the advice of your doctor.
Right.
But I do think meditation and the honoring of the divine feminine through a meditation practices that connect us to our wombs is deeply, deeply, deeply sacred. I meditated on the moon for about a year and synced my cycle up with the moon. This is when I wasn't on birth control. And holy heck, that's amazing. To have your period on the same day as the full moon is incredible. And Okay, so why is this holy? Because I know there's tons of women who are like, I'd like to pretend it doesn't exist.
Right.
Um,
And there's a
well,
lot of men
it's
that would
just
like to pretend it doesn't exist too.
yeah. Life, death, and resurrection. If you're comfortable with seeing a picture of Christ displayed on a cross, bleeding and emaciated, then you must know that the blood between a woman's legs is just as holy as the blood of Christ, because it is the blood of life. I have a major ball buster for you men. There's no woman that has her period that is infertile. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I'm sure there's tons of women who have their period who are struggling to get pregnant. But that is a sign of fertility.
Right.
That is a sign that a woman can create life.
Right.
That is how women, when women got married far too young, they said, oh, she's ready to get married. She's bleeding.
Right.
It was a sacred blood of life.
Right. Her body has prepared itself to be able to bear children.
Right. The goddess of childbirth was always the goddess of death.
Yes.
Because women in our bodies know life, death, and resurrection, because our womb's lining, our skin literally dies and resurrects every month. Life, death, and resurrection. So for women, all the pain, all the bloating, all the nastiness that comes up, oh, I'm not going to go into it now, but that is the time for shadow work. And actually, you know what? I'm not even going to go into it too much. I'm going to say sign up for the High Priestess Path, because that is the time when the shadow, the ritual, the ancestral work, the honoring of the feminine, the connection and relationship to your body, like that is when that all comes into play. My favorite week of the month is the week that I menstruate. Favorite week.
There's
and I know a lot of women
out there
who do
probably
that.
going, oh my God, she is crazy.
Yeah. It is the greatest time. I know that there's some people who talk about honoring menstruation and like talk about sex and everything. I will not have sex that week. I will not while I'm bleeding. It's too holy. I am alone. I don't really interact with anyone. My full masculine and feminine comes integrated, and I honor myself so deeply. And just imagine if we lived in a world where you could literally go to your boss and say, well, on the third week of every month, I menstruate, so I won't be coming into work. And they go, oh, that makes sense. Thank you. But I'll still get my full month of work done.
Right.
So, yeah. I won't continue because I know we're at time, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm always fine with going over a little bit if we need to.
Okay.
So if you really have a few points that you want to make, by all means, feel free to do so if you have the time to do so.
I think I'm going to stop there, and I think I'm just going to say to women, if what I'm saying is intriguing to you, follow the link that I believe Joshua posted. And
yeah, it is in the description of...
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's in the episode description, so, they can find it now, and, whenever, if they watch this 6 months down the road, there'll still be that link there that will...
It probably will be dead if you're watching it 6 months down the road, but either way, let's talk, because even if I were to talk about this for another hour, it wouldn't be doing this work service.
Right.
And in fact, this topic alone makes me want the High Priestess Path to go for 6 months, not 10 weeks. So there is so much important work that comes with this that, if this is interesting to you, let's talk. Let's really dive into this
and even
together.
Even if they don't get a hold of you through that link, let me scroll down, because I'm sure, I've got your Instagram and your Facebook is there for people to be able to reach out and connect to you. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I had more than just that link in there for people to reach out to.
I would imagine there's more.
Yeah.
And if it is 6 months from now and that link isn't working, go to my Instagram, because I'll have a link there.
Yes.
Or you can DM me. So, yeah.
So I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time, your energy, your knowledge, bringing just all of this to us. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to sit and, share this knowledge and listen to this knowledge that you have. And, there's part of me that wishes I could take this course just because I want to gather that same information, because it's all intriguing to me. It's stuff that I think that not just women need to know this, but I think men need to have a deeper understanding of this and things along those lines, could give men a deeper understanding of this so they have a better understanding of the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm probably going to do something for men.
If you
I have
do,
to figure
let me know.
Yeah, I have to figure out what it is because I'm not interested in it's a lot of labor to work
Oh,
with men. So I think I'm going to probably do it partner with another guy who's deeply in his divine masculine and divine feminine and see what we can do together. So I'm on the lookout for a guy who is deeply aware of the divine feminine and I'm aligned with him a lot, and also looking for exactly what I would want to do.
right.
So,
Well, and I have put that offer out though with the men's group that myself
your
and
group.
Melvin
Yeah,
is going to
let's
be
stay in
doing.
touch.
I definitely, when we get that launched, which I have a feeling right now is probably not going to be till after the first of the year with just some things going on.
That's fine.
And part of it is Melvin and myself are wanting to make sure we take the time to put this together right, so that we can
Sure.
present this together, and we're putting the work into it. And I've even said that the discussion on the divine feminine has to be had. We have to
Yeah.
bring this up. It's got to be that discussion, and we need to have women involved in these conversations. It can't just be men sitting there talking with men on this.
Right. Well, right. Because I think that, yeah, I
Yeah,
agree. I'd love to share my ideas. So,
I'm
yeah,
excited. But thank you so much for being here tonight. I do want to let people know that our next show will be on Tuesday, and that is actually going to be with Demian Gover and Melvin Nix, and we are going to be continuing our conversation that we started this month off on, which is spiritual hijacking. And so we are going to continue that conversation. So please join us. That's at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And I just, once again, Lurie, thank you for being here. If you guys haven't got in touch with Lurie and you want to, there's information for the High Priestess Path, as well as her Instagram and her Facebook down into the description. If you want to connect with Breaking Reality through the communities there, or if you just have questions that you want to, get out, there's a Discord link down there, as well as a link to the Facebook. And if you want to support the show and stuff, there's links down there to do that as well. But we're going to continue to produce this material and put it out there. Don't feel that you have to donate or anything. We're doing this because this information needs to be out there for people to hear, for people to listen. And I really want to thank you once again, Lurie, for your time and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a good night, and everyone be blessed.